It was 2013. The Nintendo 3DS was 2 years into its lifespan. While we had gotten a remake of Ocarina of Time in 2011, people were clamoring for a brand new Zelda. I remember when this game was first announced. A sequel to A Link to the Past? That was definitely enough to pique my interest. This is emphasized even more with the Japanese release, where the game is called Triforce of the Gods 2, which is, outside of Zelda 2, the only time Zelda uses a numeric sequel. But despite that, it's a distant sequel. New Link, new Zelda, etc. While there was some fear that the game would be a copy of Link to the Past, I'm happy to say that while it does pay homage, it does enough things different that it makes it a worthy sequel to the original. After the development of Spirit Tracks wrapped, most of the team was moved to work on Skyward Sword, but as few stayed to begin development on the first Zelda game for Nintendo's new 3DS system. Haramusha Shikaka and Shiro Moore, along with a third member, were to brainstorm ideas. At first, their idea was to do a game similar to Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures, but Shigeru Miyamoto shot down the idea. Distraught, the team went back to the drawing board and came up with the idea of Link being able to merge with walls. Intrigued, Miyamoto gave them the green light, but the project was shelved when the team went to work on several Wii U projects, but Eiji Onuma would keep the project alive after work on Skyward Sword was completed. Miyamoto expressed interest in porting A Link to the Past to the 3DS and making use of 3D, but Onuma didn't think the idea sounded interesting enough, so he instead suggested making it a sequel to the game, essentially returning to the top-down 2D Zelda of games past, feeling this would make it for a better contrast with the wall-merging gameplay. Shikaka, now back on the project as director, felt that making the game non-linear was the best approach, as many were turned off by Skyward Sword's immense linearity. The problem with this was that each Zelda game had you get the item in the dungeon, and you would use that item to find the next dungeon. To get around this, the idea was to have every item available at once, but the player would be able to rent them from a shop. If they died, the items would be returned to the shop. But they could buy the item permanently if they had the rupees, thus placing more emphasis on rupees than ever before. The team was pleased with the results of the game, and on that note, let's cover our story. Be forewarned, there are spoilers from here on out. We open with a prologue, as is typical with Zelda games. This retells us the story of A Link to the Past, except there's some minor mistakes. It claims Ganon was sealed away in darkness, even though he was clearly destroyed at the end of A Link to the Past, and it claims the Triforce was separated, even though the Oracle games depicted it as whole, so clearly something happened off screen that we weren't privy to. This is setting up a parallel of Lowell, as we shall soon see. As usual, we open with Link being woken up, because that's just typical. Every game since A Link to the Past has largely had it. Link, our hero, is the apprentice of a blacksmith this time. He's overslept and has to deliver the sword to the captain. But on his way to the sanctuary, the priest's daughter Saris is in danger, and Link meets Yuga, who is our villain for this tale. He turns Saris into a painting and leaves Link alone. Link awakens and meets Ravio, who is dressed up in a rabbit costume, which is a fun little bit of foreshadowing if you've played A Link to the Past, and he gives Link a special bracelet. Following a meeting with Princess Zelda, who sends our hero to find Sahasrahla, and gives him the Pendant of Courage. Good thing too, for as soon as Link meets Sahasrahla, a barrier traps the castle, and Link must go and get the other pendants and follow the formula of A Link to the Past, get the Master Sword, etc. But there's a bit of a twist this time, as we shall soon see. Let's talk about our villain Yuga for a minute. Whenever he shows up, he makes a note to hum his own theme. He contrasts Ganondorf quite well. He throws temper tantrums when Link starts to get the better of him. He's very effeminate, and he's just a lot of fun to watch. Unlike Girahim, he actually tries to get rid of Link by turning him into a painting, only failing because the bracelet Ravio gave Link allows Link to merge in and out of walls at will. The reason for this was because when they wanted Link to have that ability, Yuga was thus given the artist's motif to explain that, so unknowingly, Yuga granted Link the ability he needed to fight back. Once again, after getting the Master Sword, exactly like in A Link to the Past, Link heads to Hyrule Castle and is able to meet Yuga and Zelda, but it's too late to stop Yuga from turning Zelda into a painting. His goal is to revive Ganon. So finally, after so many years, Ganon is going to make an appearance in the Zelda game. It's been 7 years since Twilight Princess, which was the last time he was the main villain in the Zelda game. This is pretty epic. Ganon's back in his classic form, which he hasn't appeared in since Four Sword Adventures, and he does nothing of note. He just lets Yuga merge with him to create Yuga Ganon, or Yuganon as fans call him. This seems a little odd. If anything, you'd think Ganon would say, "Who are you to command me, you insignificant worm?" and then swat Yuga aside. Kinda underwhelming for his big return. Now, the implication is that he's not all there in the head. All seems lost for our hero, but Princess Hilda of Lorule subdues you, Ganon, and Link finds himself in Lorule, which essentially serves as this game's Dark World. How many parallel dimensions does Hyrule have? From then on, the story becomes saving the 7 stages to gather the Triforce of Courage, so that you can then access Lorule Castle to rescue Zelda as per usual. Though Hilda seems to be an ally, various scenes at the end of some of the dungeons show that things are not always as they appear, as Hilda will speak to Zelda about how lucky she is to have a kingdom like Hyrule. The story of A Link Between Worlds comes with Ravio, Hilda, and Yuga, who are the Lorule counterparts to Link, Zelda, and Ganon. Giving this away early, but Ravio is Link's Lorule counterpart, and this is cleverly hinted at by him wearing a rabbit costume, which, as you may recall, was the form Link took when he first entered the Dark World in A Link to the Past. We later learned that he was Hilda's chosen champion to save Lorule, but unlike Link, Ravio lacks courage, but he didn't want to doom Hyrule while saving Lorule, so he acts as a secret mentor to Link because he knows Link can save both kingdoms. So in that sense, Ravio shows guile. Hilda's desire is to save Lorule. You see, as she reveals, while the ancestors of Hyrule sealed their Triforce away in the Sacred Realm, Lorule's ancestors destroyed theirs, thus dooming Lorule to a slow decay. Hilda thus sends Ravio and Yuga to claim Hyrule's Triforce, but she sees destroying Hyrule as a necessary evil to save Lorule. Unlike Zelda, Hilda lacks wisdom. She's too short-sighted to see how destroying Hyrule will not restore Lorule's honor. But as she wants to save her kingdom, she's not evil, just misguided. Yes, I know her name being Hilda is a nod to Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Yuga, on the other hand, unlike Ganon, he lacks power. It's only by merging with Ganon that he's able to obtain that, but despite that, he does display wisdom and courage. Essentially, he has faith in what he's doing. But it's pretty obvious that Yuga isn't going to stay loyal to Hilda, as we shall soon see. One little note I'd like to make is that the sages more resemble the Ocarina of Time sages instead of the 7 sages from A Link to the Past, but it has to do with the fact that Link to the Past had them as 7 wise men, when as Ocarina of Time showed, most of the sages were women and different races. So how do these connect to the 7 maidens at all? I guess we're not descended from them. While this story contains a lot of the similar beats to A Link to the Past, there are enough differences to make A Link Between Worlds story stand out. I want to explore more of Lorule. Since this takes place in the Downfall timeline, I have to wonder what Lorule's fate is in the child and adult timelines. Granted, Lorule wasn't a thing when those games were made, so yeah, story for another time. The graphic style rather lovingly updates Link to the Past art style to 3D. Everything about it just feels so clean. The music is orchestrated, and sadly the CD of it is long out of print, so the only way to get this music is to look up unofficial YouTube videos of the songs. While Hyrule is meant to closely resemble as it did in Link to the Past, Lorule is all broken up and decayed, and getting to the areas you need to go will require traveling across both Hyrule and Lorule, and switching to them via fissures in the wall. To wrap it all up, the game runs at an incredibly smooth 60 frames per second, which just really elevates the game's performance. A Link Between Worlds returns Zelda the classic top-down formula. No touchscreen to swing the sword, it's all done with buttons. Link now has access to almost every item at the start. No items have ammo. Link now has a stamina meter that when it runs out, Link can't use the item anymore and must wait for it to recharge. This was done because of the ability to do every dungeon in any order. It was hard to justify you having to collect an item in any dungeon. This had the unfortunate side effect of lowering the difficulty to an extent that there's no challenge, but that is what hero mode is for. I didn't die at all, so I didn't get to show Ravio taking the items back, unfortunately. The lower screen is only used for maps and items, and that's a very good thing. Like other Zeldas, A Link Between Worlds has a travel system, which is using Irene, the witch, to give Link rides to weather panes, which also serve as save points. It's a brilliant idea. Returning from A Link to the Past are the Pegasus Boots mapped to a button. Link can run incredibly fast in one direction, and this is a welcome return. In fact, it's needed for a heart piece. The game even has a ruby counter due to the abundance of things you need. While running the items is cheap, outright owning them is pricey. Inflation is a pain, but I suppose now we'll just get into the nit and gritty of the dungeons. Since you can nab the items in any order, the dungeon you're about to go into does tell you which item they recommend you have before going in, and if you don't have it, it's a simple matter of flying back to Link's house to get the one you need. First up is the Eastern Palace. The Eastern Palace is your pretty standard opening dungeon. It's a sense of familiarity. The layout is simple, you only have 3 floors, and you no longer need to get a dungeon map in the dungeons. You just get a compass that tells you where the treasure chests are. The boss battle is against Yuga, who turns Osfala into a painting. Yuga's a pretty standard boss battle, bringing back memories against Againem. The trick is to just stun him with an arrow and slash him with your sword. Once he's defeated, you can access the wall merging ability, which allows you to see outside the dungeon, opening up new ways to explore. It's a fun little addition. Next up, I did the House of Gales, which requires using the Tornado Rod, which levitates Link into the air for a few seconds and can lift things up. If I was to sum up this dungeon, it definitely puts the Tornado Rod and the theme of wind to good use. You'll be doing everything with wind in this dungeon. The mini-boss Heatles requires use of the Tornado Rod to extinguish their flames, and it's a pretty standard boss. Margramil is actually a pretty creative boss, since you must use the Tornado Rod to get on top of it and slash at its exposed eye, and while it is spinning around you must knock the layers of its body down so you can get back on top. Very nice. The Tower of Hera involves around using the hammer to pound the moles into the ground, and standing on top of them and getting sent right up. Nice little change, making it more of a remix than a rehash. Clearly this visual is meant to be experienced with 3D on. This dungeon is perhaps the one that makes the most use out of merging with walls to make your way through the dungeon. It's basically a spectacular climb to get to Muldrum. You again. Well, I guess someone brought you back to life. Just a sense of familiarity. I must admit, the new take on the Lost Woods threw me for a loop before you get to the Master Sword. Getting to Yuga and Hyrule Castle feels very similar to this point in A Link to the Past, and that's the intention. Yuga fights similar to how he did before, only now he splits into 3, and a lot of his attacks definitely bring back memories of Againem. It just highlights how Yuga lacks power, unlike Ganon. Now that the game has opened up the low roll, it's where the game truly kicks into high gear. I suppose I'll talk about the extras. The pieces of heart are all hidden in various ways via using the fissures to your advantage. This Kuko minigame, dig up as many rupees as you can under 30 seconds, which took a lot of effort to do so. This baseball minigame that I swear I didn't really know how to make work. I just kinda got lucky after about 50 tries. Both High Roll and Low Roll have 50 baby Mai-Mais, which all revolve around a variety of ways to get them. Once you get 10 of them, you can take them back to the mother, and she will upgrade an item you own and make it more powerful. I won't get into too much detail since these upgrades are largely optional, but it's a nice reason to go after these things. The final reward, the Great Spin, is a fine reward, if nothing else. At least you get something unlike the Korok Seeds. A Link Between Worlds made use of the Street Pass function, which I can't really show off right now considering the state of the world. Thank you, COVID. Walking around outside is not really an option right now. I miss going to conventions with my 3DS in my pocket and picking up Dark Links to fight. Once you get all of them, you have to fight Gramps, who many suspect is the Link from A Link to the Past. That's unproven, but it's an interesting theory. Like before, you can upgrade the Master Sword to both the Tempered Sword and then the Golden Sword. You just gotta find the Master Ores this time. I guess they didn't feel like doing the Great Fairy Fountain again. The Thieves' Hideout requires a password, and I actually guessed it without doing any of the clues because I'm just that good. Most of this dungeon revolves around Link teaming up with a thief girl. If you remember A Link to the Past where the girl turned out to be Blind the Thief, you'd be surprised to learn that she is genuinely helpful and not antagonistic at all. Well played, Nintendo. The boss style Blind is pretty clever. Link must hide on its shield and then slash at its head with the sword. A nice change on the Blind the Thief boss battle that puts Link's new abilities to good use. You rescue Oswala, and he will give you the Sand Rod, which allows Link to summon pillars to run on. Not exactly the most creative, but I guess you gotta make do with what you have. The next dungeon I did was the Desert Palace, which largely takes place in Hyrule, as it's the one area you couldn't get to when you started the game. It basically revolves around using sand pillars with the Sand Rod to traverse the dungeon. It's a fresh take since we haven't had something like this before. The sand tiles that come at you, but hey, I have a shield now so you can just bounce harmlessly off me. You do get the Titan's Mitt in this dungeon, which allows Link to pick up large rocks, hence I went to this dungeon early. The boss battle, Zagnaga, is about being in the right place at the right time, and subsequently just making sure you are on the right path at the right time. You rescue Irene here, so that'll bring conversations back to whenever you use the bell. I guess that's nice. I did like the journey to the Dark Palace, as it reminded me of going to the other palace in A Link to the Past. It's just this time you gotta stay hidden, and no monkey comes out of nowhere to help you. The Dark Palace is true to its name, as many areas are dark and devoid of light. The trick is to often take out a source of light which will illuminate the way you should go, but you must also add light to the dungeon by destroying barricades. The boss battle against Gamma-Sword King, you have to simply destroy his outer shell, and you'll get very rich, just a little annoying to time the bomb blast to destroy the mask. You rescue Gully, the little kid at the beginning of the game, and I do like the optional touch of going back and telling his parents that he's okay. Getting to the Swamp Palace requires leading this huge bomb, the Pay Dirt. Of course, if an enemy touches it, boom, you have to go all the way back and get it. Ugh. The Swamp Palace is based around manipulating water currents and using the hookshot to flip switches. This is a better way to do the changing water levels. It required a fair deal of thinking on my part. The boss battle, Argus, is pretty similar to the fight in Link to the Past, so not really much to add on my part. You save the Zora Sage, or I guess they're trying to explain why some Zoras are good and some are bad. The Skullwoods dungeon is pretty similar to the dungeon from A Link to the Past. You must access the dungeon from outside the woods, and enter various sections to traverse through the dungeon. You do get the blue mail in this dungeon, making its long return after so long. I do like the take on the boss, Knuckle Master. It's a good way to build tension with the hand destroying the floor below you. And I do like that in order to get the jump on it, you have to merge with the wall while it's charging at you. Heh. That is pretty funny. Link will finally rescue Ceres, which will give some closure to that plot thread. Turtle Rock is given that name quite literally, as Link must ride the back of a turtle to reach it. Yeah, okay. This dungeon is all about using warp points to travel through it. Basically, you must use the ice rod to open passageways to the treasure chest, and make sure you don't fall into the lava. This dungeon does contain a Hylian shield, which is the strongest shield in the game. The boss, Grenix, is a snapping turtle. Well, he'll snap at you, and the trick is to slash at his neck while it's exposed. That's one of those bosses that keeps you on your toes. Not much to it. Link rescues Impa, and it's a sage that makes sense. The sages are hard to reconcile with the maidens from A Link to the Past. The Ice Ruins is all about using the fire rod to destroy blocks of ice or cracks of ice. Nothing much to it, it's all about moving this central column from floor to floor. I did enjoy traversing the outer rooms of the dungeon and carefully moving between the platforms, and figuring out where I was supposed to go. Darkstare, who I swear sounds like a Care Bears villain, is pretty simple, just has to be unthawed and typical slash attacks. Boom, save Russo, boom, Triforce of Courage. Though I wonder how it ends up in the Great Palace after this. I'm getting off topic, that's a story for another time. Before I wrap this up, I'll talk real quick about the Treacherous Tower. I was able to do all 3 levels as the challenge wasn't really there, although it does help to go in with potions and fairies. It's only annoying because you have to do the advanced setting twice to get everything. Finally, accessing Lowrow Castle, it's your typical culmination of everything. Perilous lava infects the castle, and you get the sense that Lowrow is on its last legs. Akin to the Wind Waker, Link must face 4 previous boss battles to unlock the door to the final showdown. I almost forgot to get the red mail, the way you get it is confusing. So this is where the final exposition dump happens, where Hilda explains what happened to Lowrow. I'm just disappointed you don't actually fight Hilda as a boss. I get that it's because she has Yuga as her enforcer, but still, it would have been interesting. Yuga Gan's weapon is a mix of Yuga's brush and Gan's trident. The first stage is pretty easy since you have to strike Yuga Gan at the navel while avoiding his weapon. But even after you beat him, Yuga just betrays Hilda and turns her into a painting. Now, shouldn't you have seen that coming? I did mention Hilda lacked wisdom. With the Triforce of Wisdom and Triforce of Power, Yuga Ganon comes at Link, but our hero is ready. The final boss against Yuga Gan is again a battle of tennis, but I found the timing on this to be rather tricky. Eventually, when you wear him down, Zelda will give Link the Bow of Light. Also, you were conscious all that time you were a painting. That's kinda horrifying. The trick is when Yuga is merged into the wall, Link must use the Bow of Light to stun him. This is accomplished by getting in the block of Bow of Light and hitting him in the back. As this goes on, Yuga Gan's attacks get more and more frantic, a subtle way of showing that Link is getting to him. The final blow is actually clever. With Zelda 3, Hilda seems determined to not give up, but Ravio is able to talk some sense into her. Zelda shows how rational she is because she understands a princess's duty to her people. I do like what's happening. It was set up well enough, and it fits with the character's motivations. Hilda sends Link and Zelda home, but they find themselves in the Sacred Realm, and, well, because our heroes are selfless, there's only one thing they can do. happy ending. So as the credits roll, I really like A Link Between Worlds. It's lacking in difficulty to be sure, but it makes up with that with its non-linear gameplay. The game is similar to A Link to the Past, but there are enough differences to give this game its own spin. I just wish it wasn't stuck on the 3DS. You gotta find some way to get your DS and 3DS games on Switch, Nintendo. Next Zelda game is Triforce Heroes, and I'd like some help with that if you could. I'll reach out to you. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit that bell, like, and subscribe button. If you want to support the channel, check out the links in the description below. See you next time.